No one remembers how it all began, but House Heidegger is a clan of outstanding swordsmen, and House Wangler, who inherited the abilities, were ready to get at each other's throats at any chance they got. Armed conflicts between these families were almost commonplace. However, during one of their countless battles, one of the princes interfered and lost his hand, and then the angry emperor said he wanted to end this feud once and for all. The Heidegger and Wangler houses should unite their houses by marriage. It was the only way they could prove their loyalty to the crown. That's where their misfortune began. At this time, when the Duke Heidegger's estate learned of the marriage, they were furious there. He said, "How can you have a child with that filthy Wangler?" Marquis Guidon Heidegger said that they know his heart already belongs to another girl, don't they? But his father said it was the emperor's order. It was better for him to bear the ruler's wrath alone than to make the whole clan suffer. Despite what was the height of despair for Guidon that day, for Paula Wangler it was the happiest day of her life. Paula couldn't believe she was going to be the wife of the Marquis Heidegger, and she said that her dreams were coming true after all. The maid, who was standing beside her, said that she had not realized that my lady had such a high opinion of Lord Heidegger. She asked if she was pleased with the way things had turned out. Paula said that of course she was pleased. She couldn't even believe that she would marry the man of her dreams. The girl was very happy. But how can happiness exist with despair? When they did get married, things were not as Paula had expected. She begged him to let her go and stop doing that. But Guidon told her not to make a sound. He would rather sleep with his prostitute than with her. It was not the marriage the girl had dreamed of, but a nightmare. The emperor asked why they still didn't have a child, and he got the feeling as if they were only pretending to be a couple. He told them to hurry up and have a baby as soon as possible because they must prove their loyalty to the crown. It was all horrible, but after many humiliating nights, they did have a baby. Duke Wangler said that apparently the Marquis doesn't really want to see his newborn daughter. Duke Heidegger accepted your deepest apologies and said that now that the child was born, he was sure the emperor would be pleased. Without the wishes of either mother or father, this little girl was born. When the duchesses approached her, they said her red hair was just like Paula's. The emperor wished the girl to be brave and grow strong like a lion, so they all decided together to name her Leonia. When the girl turned a year old, the maids congratulated her and asked her if she liked their new beau. Leonia may have been deprived of parental love, but she was certainly not deprived of material wealth. And at that moment Marquis came in and told Paula that she had killed her. The girl did not understand what it all meant. The Marquis stepped closer and drew his sword. Said he was aware that she used to love him. When he asked if that was the reason she killed her, that this dead girl had nothing to do with her, so he would already admit that he only blamed her for everything bad. When the maid tried to calm the Marquis, he struck her with his sword, and then she fell down and blood came out of her. When Leonia saw all this, she started crying and screaming because she was scared. But no one paid any attention to her. As the girl grew a little older, she began to follow Guidon. When the Duchess said she follows him around all day and why doesn't he at least say hello to her, he may not love her, but she is his only child after all. To this, Guidon said that she looks just like her mother, and it's disgusting. After a while, Leonia approached her mother, who was lying in bed. She attacked her, started to chase her away, and told her that those green eyes would kill her. One day the girl asked Osmo, who was looking out for her, where her daddy was. He said Lord Hyder had too much to do today, and he himself thought that this very poor and little miss had been neglected by the lord and lady. And all she can do is just draw some pictures, as if begging for at least a drop of attention from her parents. A couple years later, Marquis Guidon inherited his grandfather's duchy, and everyone congratulated him then and called him Duke. There was a very lavish party and inauguration. Some of the guests came up to the Duke and said that they had heard that he had fought brilliantly in the last battle, and that he was a master swordsman. And at that moment, Leonia thought that he seemed happy that day. So she decided it was a good moment to give him her drawing. Maybe then she would like him. Apparently they decided that even a tiny bit of hope would be too much for the girl. Her father told her to get ready to say goodbye to her mother. At that moment, the girl thought that she couldn't just give up and leave, because Leonia had seen very little of her over the years. But when the girl came running in, the maid said she couldn't go in there and asked if she realized she would only make things worse. Leonia knew that even in moments like these, she was the kind of person who could be completely ignored. When the girl ran back and the maids told her she couldn't run down the hall because they had guests, but the other one told her to leave her, because apparently the girl was not allowed to see the Duchess again. On days like this, she would usually ride away on her horse without anyone realizing it. Riding her horse, she wondered why everyone hated her. She didn't understand what she had done wrong, why her parents didn't care, and at that moment, the horse accidentally twisted its leg, and there was a big thump. When the girl woke up, a helper approached her and asked if she was okay, and explained that she had fallen off her horse and had been unconscious for several days. When the girl looked at her hand, she wondered if her mom was still alive. The deputy said she was still alive, but didn't understand why she was asking so suddenly. When he saw that Leonia was out of bed, he said she should take a break and her body needed time to recover. But the girl did not listen to him. She went to the mirror, looked at herself, and then said that she urgently needed to see her mother. At that moment the guy thought she wasn't herself today. It was really weird. As Leonia headed toward her mother's room, the maid asked why she kept coming there. After all, she had already told her that when a dog barks at its master, it means it deserves a good whipping. Leonia interrupted her and finished the sentence, saying to remind the dog who his master was. The maids heard this, and they were shocked. They didn't understand what was happening to the girl, because she had never been like this before. Leonia told them to get out of the way and not to disturb her. She then went into her mother's room. When she looked at Paula, she was very happy, and said she was glad to see her. She said afterwards that it must have hurt, and she was a bad mother. But now she realizes how horrible her life was. Lying down next to his mother, she said that she promised that she would make him know despair and regret all his actions. Leonia will make him suffer with her own hands. When she heard this, she turned to the girl and stroked her hair. After a brief silence, Leonia said that even if only for a few days, she prayed that at least for this remaining time her mother would be happy. Then Gwydon looked out of the window and saw his daughter and his wife out for a walk. And he told his assistant that he had been told that she had not long to live, but she was still very alert for her poor condition. That surprised him. A counselor named Oslo said the doctor was saying that Lady Paula was not being treated now, but rather just using the rest of her strength. The Marquis said she was a very stubborn woman, and asked how much longer he could put up with the sight of her. He also asked how old she was now. When Oslo heard this, she was very much surprised and asked him again if he meant Lady Leonia, and he himself thought that the Duke had never yet asked about the little miss. Oslo then said that Lady Leonia would be 10 years old at the end of the month. The Marquis said that meant a feast. At this point Oslo thought he was at last beginning to take an interest in Little Miss, and said that they were not yet ready for such a thing, as his lordship had forbidden such a celebration after Miss's second birthday. After that he gave him the papers and said it was a report on what Miss Leonia was doing. Said that after the academy she was mostly walks into a local cafe with her new painting supplies. When the Duke heard this, he was surprised and asked if she was painting. Oslo was very pleased with this, and he said that Miss was very talented. The Imperial Academy itself had offered to hold an exhibition of her work. When Gwydon heard this, he asked what this nonsense was, and also ordered that they should refuse the exhibition. Oslo was upset, but he had to comply. Givaudan then asked if his daughter's grades had changed. Oslo said that she was second in her class this semester, so she was doing well. Then the Duke said that at least this girl's mind had not taken after her mother, and asked if she might have any signs of mystical powers. At least one person in every generation of House Wangler inherits mystical abilities, and each time they are so different that they cannot be judged by a set standard. One predicted the future, another controlled the weather. There were even some who could control other people. But it is said that the mystical powers of the Wanglers grow weaker with each generation. If she could awaken even a drop of those powers within her, she wouldn't have to suffer the humiliation as she did now. Said Wangler abilities usually appear at the age of 15, and only time would tell if Miss Leonia had inherited them. Afterward, the Duke asked, "What of her possession of the sword? She's half Heidegger after all. Can't she create at least a semblance of an aura?" The counselor then said that she would still have to learn more about creating auras as well. The real purpose of the information is the Emperor's hope that the offspring of the sword and sorcerer master will become a child with incredible abilities. The Marquis thought it very ironic that the result was a completely useless child. Thinking about it, he asked, "Is there any more news about the girl?" Oslo then said she had recently visited Countess Stein-Michelson's parlor 3 times. Duchess Stein-Michelson is a lady who is in the business of running secret errands for the nobility. The only condition for her services is that when she asks, he is obliged to accept. When the Duke heard the name, he asked, "What is the business of Leonia and that vile woman? What does the girl go to her for?" Then Oslo said that it seemed the Countess had recently acquired rare books from the East for sale, and Miss Leonia had purchased several books on Oriental art. Then Marquis realized that the girl was only 10, and that woman had not asked her for anything, so he needn't worry. After that he said that the only good thing about the girl was her face, so he said he should start looking for a husband for her. He told Oslo to choose the one who would offer a larger dowry. When he heard this, the associate said that he would do as the Duke wished. After that, the Marquis asked if he could also get a doctor. When Oslo asked him if he was not feeling well, the Duke said that his headache had gotten worse. At this time, Paula and her daughter arrived at the garden and began to drink tea. The mother asked how the daughter was going to do it. Leonia replied that it would be slow. They will be like frogs floating in a boiling cauldron, not even realizing their imminent death. Then Paula asked her daughter to make them beg to die for her. After a brief silence, the mother said that one day Leonia would have children. She asked the girl if she thought she could understand how she felt then. The girl said that anything could happen. Then Pavlova replied that seeing his disgusting appearance in the face of her favorite child was her cruelest curse. When Leonia heard the word beloved child, she was very surprised and asked her mother if she loved her. Paula said she prayed every day, every second, that the girl would not repeat her own fate. Then she asked, "Isn't that love?" When Leonia heard this, she thought her mother's pleas had been answered. Paula said that it had been 3,774 days and 15 hours. The girl replied that her mother had been in that hellish prison too long. Paula apologized to her daughter for leaving her alone, but the girl said it was okay. The mother said it was her fault and that she was sorry. Leonia said she believed her and said goodbye. After that, the mother's eyes closed forever. When the girl returned to the castle, she was met at the entrance by a maid and asked, "Does she need anything?" Leonia turned to her and told her to have them prepare the funeral. The maids were discussing this incident. One of them said that she knew it was only a matter of time before they had to prepare the funeral. After all, Lady Heidegger was at her last breath. When one of the maids asked where Miss Leonia had gone during the preparations, the other said she was probably back in her room. At this time in the street, Oslo, seeing the girl, thought that Duke Heidegger had told him to keep an eye on Miss Leonia, but the girl had gone to the forbidden section of the royal library. He could not follow her there. He didn't know what she should do now, and wondered why a little girl would go there in the middle of preparing for a funeral. When Leonia entered the library, she was greeted by a man and told that His Majesty was already waiting. After that, they walked a little way. The girl saw His Majesty in front of her and bowed. Standing in the middle of the books, he said he was ready for her services. On the day of the funeral, the maid helped the girl get ready. She said that many important people would attend the funeral today. When she asked that the girl let her tie her hair back to make it look better, she told her to leave it as it was. After that, Leonia stood up and said that she wasn't going to linger any longer to please other people. When she went out into the corridor, she met Gwydon on the way. When she saw him, she bowed and greeted him. The Duke was very surprised and wondered when she had learned to behave so politely. After that, he said that she finally had a face on her that he could look at, and told them to get going. Hearing all this, he was very surprised because it was unusual. Normally his lordship would have ordered him to get rid of the girl. When they went inside, some people were whispering, saying that this chapel was magnificent. His partner said he was sure even the Duchess would have liked it. As the Duke and Leonia took their seats, the girl thought that the former Duke and Duchess Heidegger hadn't even bothered to show up. Sometime later, when the guests were assembled, the royal valet came to the coffin and said that her ladyship's soul rested in peace. Afterwards, some man said that His Majesty had sent these flowers to express his deepest condolences. When the guests heard this, they started whispering because these are special specimens that only breed in the royal garden. One of the guests said he couldn't believe that the Kaiser's representative, the royal valet himself, had personally brought the flowers. The chamberlain said it was such a pity, and if only Duchess Paula could see what part she was honored with. Hearing this, Leonia was surprised. Marquis asked his daughter where she was yesterday. She was nowhere to be found as she went through the funeral preparations. Leonia said she was in the library. When the Duke heard this, he said she must be out of her mind, but then he added that he had prepared a present for her, and he was sure she would be pleased. But he told her to be careful not to lose her temper, for she was Heidegger after all. Leonia thought at that moment that they would soon see what this Heideggerian self-possession consisted of. And smiling, she said that this was a very pleasant coincidence, because she too has prepared a gift for his lordship, and she prays that he likes it. When the Duke heard this, he said that in that case he would look forward to it. After the ceremony, the guests moved around and started talking amongst themselves. Do you think Heidegger will be the next Duchess? I don't know. Duke Guidon is charming, but I hear he hasn't forgotten his late sweetheart yet. Nevertheless, noble daughters will lie at his feet, said the Duchess of Stein. Poisoned or not, the bowl is pretty useless as it is, she said. But no one listened to her. People didn't understand what she was doing here. Then Duke Dieter Wangler, Leonia's maternal grandfather, approached the girl and asked her why she had come here. Stein was surprised and said the reason was over there, pointing to a pregnant woman and a little girl who entered the room. This girl ran up to Marquis Guidon, shouting out, "Father!" When the guests heard this, they were surprised. Someone said that he thought Leonia was their only child. Afterward, a girl approached her and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you Magda Lichter, my beloved and future Duchess." The guests began to whisper. She looks exactly like Eliza. You mean the former lover who died? Yes, her. And this is Magda's younger sister. Then the Duke said that this adorable little girl is his daughter, and her name is Sharon Heidegger. People began to whisper again. They said that poor Miss Leonia must be shocked to hear all this on the day of her mother's funeral. But Leonia thought at this moment that everything was happening exactly as it had before, so she wasn't surprised. She had to endure years of horror before she could return to childhood, and the horrors would not end. Leonia's stepmother and stepsister never missed an opportunity to abuse her, and the servants followed suit. Once, as the maid was braiding Leonia's hair, the girl asked where her mother and sister had gone. The maid said they were on their way to pick out Miss Sharon a new dress, and afterward laughed and asked, "She doesn't expect them to bring her a present?" Leonia stammered and said she hadn't expected any of this. Then the maid said she understood, and she would bring her food later. In the hallway, another maid said she should be more careful. She was Duke Heidegger's daughter, after all. Leonia, standing at the door, overheard their conversation. "Why dead? And the Duke treating her as if she were an orphan," the maid said to her in reply. She also added that she shouldn't worry about Miss Leonia. After that, the girl went to her father's house and went in and bowed, asking if he had summoned her. The Duke asked if she had not yet awakened her magical powers. Leonia started to get nervous and said that they were not awake yet. Then the Duke got angry and started yelling at her. He said she had no ability or skill in swordsmanship. She was completely useless. At that moment, the girl thought, is she really that disgusted with her father? He always told Sharina that he loved her no matter what, and would always love her. Afterward, Marquis said that he would soon find her a suitable husband. Let her make sure that while he did, she would look her best. Leonia thought her father had decided she had no other use for her. He had sold her hand to men 3 times. Her first husband had been a prince. His title was empty, as was his political influence, but he was kind. They were happy together, but it only lasted a year until he was killed. With her second husband, they had a son, Emile, who was more precious to Leonia than her whole life. But her husband and child disappeared, and her second marriage ended. One of the Duke's aides said that even after 2 divorces, her pretty face sells for quite a decent price. Then the Duke said he wasn't even hoping for a 3rd time, but it worked. His assistant said that she needed to do some good. That's how Leonia's father sold her again. Her 3rd husband was not happy with their marriage, for he too had been forced to accept it. The girl lived in his neglect, the only exception being the agreed marriage day. Leonia thought at this moment that her life was not at all different from her mother's. Perhaps the heavens took pity on her, but at the same time that she conceived the 8th prince's child, her mystical powers were awakened. Once the girl realized this, she thought that they were too weak and not fully awakened, and would be too hasty to tell everyone. So she thought it was better to tell only the prince about the pregnancy. The 8th prince found out about the pregnancy. That's all he did before he went to battle. Meanwhile, Leonia swore to herself that she would protect this child. Pregnant, she talked to him, and told him she wanted him to know how happy she was to have him. But even the faintest and glimmer of hope must be crushed. She was soon charged with a capital offense. When she asked that her father be summoned, Lord Heidegger was deaf to her pleas, and her maternal kin had long since been destroyed. She still hadn't heard any news of her husband on the battlefield. She reassured herself that even if he were here, he wouldn't be of any help. She remembered Osmo, her father's counselor. He was the only one who cared for her and loved her. She remembered his words. "Wait, Miss Leonia, Countess Stein is on her way. We'll get you out of here." But they never came. Leonia thought, has the plan failed? Or has he turned his back on me too? All the girl had left was her ability. When she tried to do something, she prayed it wouldn't fail. Suddenly she heard someone's footsteps. She didn't know who it was, but she hoped she had been vindicated. But Shireen walked up to her cell and said that half the prison matched her skin color, laughing loudly. When Leonia saw her, she asked what she was doing here. Shireen gave her escort a look that told him to do so. Then Oslo's head fell at Leonia's feet. When the girl saw it, she was upset. She didn't know what to do now. Sharon asked the girl if she liked the gift, and also told her that she had good news. Sister said that Leonia's husband would soon become emperor. He destroyed all his brothers and declared victory 3 days ago. Sharon said her father helped him with the treason upon his return. He agreed to make her empress. The sister told Leonia to do them all a favor and just die. Leonia didn't understand what was going on, but then asked what was wrong with her baby. Sharon was surprised and asked, does she really want that child to survive? She's sure the child wouldn't even want to grow up with such a pathetic mother. The girl said, isn't it beautiful? Just like her mother killed Leonia's mother Paula, she's killing her. When Leonia heard this, she was shocked. Now she knew who had caused her mother's death. She asked how Sharon could do that. She wasn't human at all. She was a monster. Sharon touched her hair and said she was the one who made her do it. So weak and stupid, she'd always inherited better titles. Sharon said she'd have to become a monster to take them away from her. Doesn't she see that? She moved closer to her and said it was all her fault. At this time, the guard drew his sword, at which point Sharon turned around and wished her well. When the guard began to approach, she asked that it not be done. Afterward, she turned to her toddler and asked, is her adorable baby boy going to leave with her? The girl said she would give him the world, a new world. And at that moment, behind her, things began to open up. Gates. Suddenly a man ran up to her and shouted her name. When Leonia looked at him, she recognized him. It was Prince Rutger. She asked if he had come here to kill her too. And at that moment she vanished, finding herself in a small body, riding a horse. She thought that all those who had plotted her destruction and prayed for her suffering, may they let her return the favor to them. After Leonia traveled through time, she promised that she would find her children wherever they were, and this time would protect those she loved. In a way, she was reassured as they all repeat their cruel actions just as they had in the past, because otherwise their crimes may not fit the punishments she has prepared. After the funeral, the Duke told Sharon that she would have to endure such situations if she wanted to be a lady. After telling her father that she would do everything, the girl walked over to Leonia and said it was nice to meet her sister. Sharon also said she was a little annoyed that they let her into their family. Leonia said it was very kind of them, and wished she was happy to have a little sister, but she had much more important things to do. At this point the girl thought that the valet and Countess Stein had all the cards laid out. All she had left to do was figure it out. She approached the Duke and said that she could not accept this man as her mother, because her real mother was murdered by Magda Leacher. Hearing all this, people started to whisper, does that mean the lady killed the Duchess? Then it wasn't the disease that killed her. Duke Wangler asked Leonia what she was saying, why she thought the woman had killed Paula. The Marquis said that was nonsense. She turned to her daughter and asked, you say Magda killed your mother? Have you gone mad with shock? He said that if she had proof, then everything would change. But then suddenly the Duchess of Stein intervened. She said they were sitting there. She pointed toward the maids who were battered and crying. Afterward, Lady Stein said that these maids had been bribed by Lady Magda long ago. These are the ones who for years dispatched the late Duchess Paula on Lady Magda's orders. Their letters of confession, the vials of poison that weren't used in the murder, and also a receipt for the purchase of said medicines by Lady Magda. All this they present in evidence for His Majesty's inspection. Handing the papers to the valet, he began to scrutinize them carefully. This moment Marquis thought that he had waited so long for this day, so that he could finally be happy with his family. He didn't understand how Magda could be a murderer. He wondered what his daughter was playing with. After a brief silence, Leonia told her father to open his eyes. He is too important to give up his duties for love. Leonia asked him to do it in the name of the House of Heidegger and the sword of the Empire. Magda said it was all nonsense. Duchess Stein thought it was the girl who had just turned the powerful Duke Heidegger into an incompetent fool blinded by love. She thought that was extremely clever for a child her age. At this point, Leonia said that she only wanted her mother to recover from her illness. So she reread every book on medicine she could find and realized that her symptoms pointed to something terrible. It's called an inheritance potion. Inheritance potion is the name of a chemical called arsenic. Its consumption will lead to a slow death resembling a chronic disease. It is usually used by heirs and relatives who are arguing over the inheritance of wealth or title. Leonia said her mom suffered from frequent vomiting and diarrhea. She coughed up blood and also blood was flowing between her legs. The girl knew that when she showed signs of dehydration and also spots on her skin, Magda was getting very nervous. But without letting his daughter finish, the Marquis interrupted her and said he had had enough of her theories. These are all frequent symptoms of chronic illness. Leonia, wiping away tears, said that the day she died she said something that made it all make sense. Then suddenly her grandfather came up to her and told her not to worry because he was here for her. Then Leonia went on and said that her mom used to say her medicine smelled like soap, and soap is the main ingredient in the inheritance potion. They started whispering and said that it was all clear now. The Duchess had been taking poison all along. The Chamberlain approached the Marquis and asked if he had anything else to add. When the Duke was silent, the valet said then, "And you me, His Majesty the Emperor. He orders the arrest of Magda Lichter on suspicion of murder, for further investigation by the Royal Guard." As the guards started to take the girl away, her daughter ran up to her and started screaming, asking why they were taking her mom away. Then suddenly the Marquis shouted and said that she was his wife and she was pregnant. Let the guards show her every courtesy and respect until her announcements were finally presented. At this point, Leonia thought to Gwydion Heidegger to just wait, for she had just begun her revenge. At that moment, Leonia's grandfather hugged his granddaughter and thought that he had to stop Paula, whatever it cost him. Paula Wangler had a fight with her father before she was married. She said it didn't sound like she was going to fight. It's just a marriage. Why would she take offense to another country? Her mother was surprised and said that the Emperor himself had forced her to make that choice. Then Paula asked, "What about Jan? What do they think about her little brother's future? Do they really want her to take a child 10 years younger than herself and live the rest of their lives in exile?" Then suddenly the father yelled at his daughter and told Paula to stop. She could sit down somewhere and start over. Paula told her father that she loved Gwydion Heidegger. Her father shouted and said that he already had a woman. He begged her to change her mind. But Paula didn't listen to him and simply walked out, slamming the door behind her. Paula's mother thought all along that her daughter had cut all ties with them because of that fight. She thought that her daughter should have told them why she had to bear all that pain alone. But Paula thought that no one knew what her parents would do if they found out. It was her choice, and she would have to take responsibility. Duke Wangler approached His Excellency and began to plead with him, because it cannot yet be said with certainty that Leonia Heidegger's life is completely safe. He asked to be allowed to be her legal guardian and custodian. When Leonia heard this, she thought that in the original, her grandfather was infuriated by Guidon's statement. He had simply left the capital that day, never to return again. The girl realized that everything that was happening now was different from what happened in the original. Leonia thought that with the Wangler house, it would be much easier for her to get her revenge and stay safe. The Wangler house still has power, so it will be much easier for the girl to carry out her revenge there. Then suddenly the Duchess of Stein intervened in the conversation and said that Miss Leonia was still calling for her father, your ladyship. Therefore she believes that Duke's custody of Miss should be reconsidered. After thinking it over a little, the valet told them that on behalf of His Majesty, he accepted their request, and the Crown would make a thorough investigation. And in case the crime was not discovered, Miss Leonia would return to her father's house. And then he asked if both parties agreed. At this point, the Marquis thought how could he even object in such a situation. But Count Wangler said that they agreed. Then the valet told him that if everything was resolved with their permission, he would go because he had other things to do. After he left, Duchess Stein told Leonia that they would see each other later. At that moment, the girl heard someone shouting. When she turned around, she saw Oslo taking Sharon out of the room. She resisted, and Oslo told her to calm down so they could talk. Guests began to disperse as well, saying the situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Hearing this, Leonia thought that once they were outside those doors, they would be unstoppable. But she knew how not to splash such a racy scene. When everyone had already dispersed, her grandparents came up to Leonia and told her that it was time for them to go too. But the girl said she had something to say to his lordship Duke Gwydden. When he saw the girl approach him, he asked what she wanted. Leonia told him to tell Sharon that I had changed my clothes, in case she could take Leonia's too. When the Marquis heard this, he asked how dare she treat his daughter as a beggar. But just as Leonia wanted to say something in her defense, her grandmother came up to her and said that, unfortunately, her granddaughter didn't have time to feel sorry for every bastard born to a duke out of wedlock. She then turned to the girl and told her not to worry because her grandmother was nearby. Leonia said she was surprised when she found out about her new family, but she is happy she has a sister. If she has a sister now, maybe she won't be so lonely. When the grandmother heard this, tears came to her eyes. She immediately hugged her granddaughter and told her she was there for her. Leonia said, something about the gold dress that Sharon was wearing was kind of weird. Grandma asked, what does weird mean? Then the girl explained that she liked to paint and knew quite a bit about colors, and Sharon's dress was the color of aura pigmentum. Leonia explained that this mineral gives a very strong color, and sometimes she uses it in her paints, but it contains a lot of lead, so you can't touch it without gloves. The teacher at the academy told them very often that aura pigment is very dangerous, and when it comes in contact with your skin, it starts to get absorbed into it, so it's incredibly dangerous to wear a dress like this. When Marquis heard this, he said that this dress was specially made to Magda's order. He didn't understand why Magda would do that, and said it was all a mistake. It was all about the tailors who made it. Marquis said he'd kill the scumbag who made the dress. Count Wangler then asked the man if he really believed it was all the fault of the tailors. If he were Magda, he would have hated the Heideggers as much as he hated the Wanglers. Leonia thought it was really as grandfather Magda said, for it was believed that Gwydden had betrayed her sister. When the Count heard this, he told him not to dare accuse his wife and began to get very angry. Dieter responded to this by saying that he's just sure that everything that happened today is part of a larger conspiracy. But if it were him, he'd investigate among his inner circle of people. But he can't leave his granddaughter in such a dangerous place. He says they will take care of the girl until the investigation is over. Afterward, they led Leonia away from the hall. When they arrived at Wangler Manor, a table was set for them. Leonia saw the table and said that she didn't think she could eat it all. Her grandmother said she had suffered so much and needed to eat to regain her strength. Grandpa said that Noelle is absolutely right and it takes a meal to recover. At this point, the girl thought that if she ate it all, they would have to roll her from the room. Noelle says that while she's here, she can rest easy. Her bedroom is being renovated a bit and it won't take long. They told her to let them know if she needed anything. When Leonia heard this, she thought it was very nice to have people who cared. Dieter said he would introduce her to her uncles later. They were about her age. In the meantime, the boys peeked at their niece eating. Said parents said she's been through a lot and they need to take good care of her. The other one hopes she will like the present they have prepared. Suddenly Grandpa heard a strange noise in the hallway. It alarmed him, and at that moment the door to the hall opened and a small creature flew in. The boys tried to stop it, but they failed. The animal flew straight to Leonia and sat in her arms. At that moment, the girl realized what her mother's family was really like. Dieter looked at the two boys and asked what they were doing. He was very angry. The boys said they just wanted to do a little surprise for Leonia, and also thought they'd stop by and say hello to their sweet niece. Then the blonde-haired guy told Leonia that he was her uncle. His name was Jan Wangler. Leonia said she was glad to meet him. Then the second boy spoke. He said he was her uncle too and his name was Tobias. He's actually a cousin, to be more precise. Jan approached the girl and asked if she liked their present. He explained that it was a sugar marsupial bat. It is very popular with the children of aristocrats. When the girl looked at the animal, she thought that, to be precise, she was neither a child nor an aristocrat, and that it was so small and fragile, aroused pity rather than emotion. Noelle told the boys, "Can't they see the girl is still eating?" But Leonia said it was all right and she was full, and she told the boys that the present was very nice. But he is so small that she even feels sorry for him. When Grandpa heard this, he said that their little granddaughter had such a good heart. Already said she was right and this poor creature seemed too weak. When the boys heard that, they said it meant something big and strong. Leonia had a bad feeling when she heard those words. The day after Marquis was arrested, went to his wife and asked how she was doing and if she needed anything. But Magda told him to stop the act, for he knows why she was here. After that, Oslo came to him in the afternoon and brought some more people. The counselor explained that it was an alchemist and an artist who had surveyed his office. The Marquis, hearing this, asked, "What is the problem then?" The artist replied that he could speculate, that the material used to dye the fabric of his chair is one of those no longer used because of its toxicity. At that moment, Marcus thought he'd done it to commemorate their anniversary with Magda, and then he guessed that his headaches were part of her plan. The men said that they believed his lordship was able to resist the toxins due to his unique swordmaster physiology. He will make a full recovery after taking the antidote, and will no longer feel ill. Oslo said to also survey the bedroom, every inch of the estate, and change all the furniture that was bought during those 8 years. Leonia thought, if all of this is true, then it could mean that all those 8 years Magda has been by his side just to kill him. He figured that if his child hadn't told him about the paint, he would have continued living in the poison without even realizing it. He thought the girl was planning to throw a tantrum and scandal to make a fool of him, but apparently he was wrong. When he came to his I don't believe dungeon, he asked why she had done all this, for he thought they had shared the pain of losing Eliza, and it had become their common pain. Magda screams at him to stop feeling sorry for himself, because it's disgusting. He keeps saying he's lost her too, but she knows perfectly well that he's just abandoned her. Marquis shouted that none of it was true, and he hadn't left her. Magda told him not to lie to himself. That's all he ever did, was feel sorry for himself for being forced into marriage. She wondered if he'd ever tried to comfort her sister in any way. Magda said he didn't even ask her to wait, didn't even apologize to her. Marquis said it was all a misunderstanding and he was under house arrest being watched the whole time. Magda said he was only starting to feel even more sorry for himself. She couldn't believe that a swordmaster could be kept under house arrest. She said he had made his choice and preferred his wealth as well as his status. He used the emperor and his parents as a convenient excuse to justify his actions. He was the one who ultimately destroyed Paula. He lived his whole life groveling to authority and taking all his problems out on the Wangler girl. Magda asked, in all those years of self-pity, is the best he could come up with was to come to her? He's just a coward. She asked, does he even know what was going on with her sister? She was trying to kill herself in every way possible. Mom sobbed day and night until it undermined her health. The day Mom and Eliza went to rehab at the convent, Dad was in the carriage with them that day to see them off, and there was an accident. And then Magda lost them all at once. She refused to go with them because she was upset. The girl asked Marquis if he had any idea how painful it was, how much regret and shame. Then he asked, is that why she dressed Shireen like that? Magda said of course, it meant that she would see him suffer because of his daughter's death, but she's sorry it had to end this way. She had hoped to destroy his entire house after she became his wife. After a little silence, Marquis said he would let her have their child. Magda blurted out, saying whoever was talking, she would end his vile offspring right here. She would kill them all. Marquis told the guard to make sure the girl didn't hurt herself, and then left. When he returned to the castle, he didn't even think about it at the funeral. But the Chamberlain believed Leonia's words and Countess Michelson's so-called evidence without reservation. Chamberlain, the Emperor's own representative, that he showed such subjectivity could mean. Suddenly he had arrived at his destination and stopped thinking about it. Gwyden Heidegger, Your Majesty, he said. When he bowed, he asked, what deal did His Majesty make with his daughter? The Emperor said he must be getting old, but would only think the day had come when he saw Gwyden Heidegger sweating with his own eyes. These words made the Marquis angry, but the Emperor continued and said that he had not noticed that he still had a second child named Sharon, and the one that hadn't been born before he'd heard about it from Leonia. The Emperor said he'd hidden them well all these years. After that he asked, did Gwyden really not know about Paula's use of the inheritance potion? Nargis said that if he wanted her dead, he would have killed her long ago rather than prolonging her life with poison. The Emperor said he always performs his work quickly and efficiently. Also said that Countess Michelson had come to him some time ago to ask to see Leonia. At first he wondered what this snake-like woman was up to this time. But to his surprise, she told a very entertaining story. The Emperor said that the Marquis's daughter had awakened her magical powers. When he heard that, he was shocked. The Emperor said, what is this ability, you ask? As she said, Leonia can travel through time and space through her paintings. It's a rare talent indeed. She was painting while remembering her mother's funeral, and suddenly she was drawn into the picture. The Emperor said that of course he still has his doubts, But they do talk about Michelson. She's not the type to give out empty promises. When Marquis heard this, he realized that the girl knew in advance what would happen at the funeral, and that's why she made such a bold statement. The Emperor replied that he had heard that he had been humiliated at the funeral. He also said that this child was a child to be reckoned with. All this time there was a lion cub living under Marquis's roof and he didn't know it. But nevertheless, the Emperor said that it seems she is still a child, and she wants affection. She only asked that Magda be removed without touching her half-sister. The Emperor said it was astounding. She looked him straight in the eye and told him not to let them touch her. Marquis asked then what the girl offered in return with her magical ability. The Emperor said it all depended on how he proceeded. The Marquis thought that the Emperor spoke as if his daughter were his property. Marquis then said that he had heard that there was unrest on the Western Front, and he could restore order there in a month. The Emperor laughed and said that it was very good. But now let him watch himself carefully because the era of knights was slowly fading away. Za can replace cannons, as well as other powerful guns. Guidon said that this is true. But people keep deciding what the purpose of the cannon will be. The Emperor said that was true. But what he really wants is to be in the hands of his daughter, Leonia. Just as the Heideggers possess the art of swordsmanship and the Wanglers' magical abilities, members of the royal family also possess power, with the ability to read a man's mind and force him to obey by placing his hand on his head. The Emperor maintains a firm grip on Guidon by giving him power. But unfortunately, the Emperor's powers are slowly fading. The Emperor told Gvidon that the moment he lowered his eyes to his daughter, that it reminded him of the days of his heyday, and it gave him hope to return to those wonderful days. At this point, Marquis thought, does he mean to say he asked for a favor? The Emperor said that if he showed the slightest interest in Leonia, he could bargain with him. After a little silence, the Marquis asked His Majesty, what should he do? The Emperor asked, now it is he who wishes it. He said his daughter had already promised to marry whomever he chose, so before her abilities fully awakened. The Emperor told him not to dare lay a finger on Leonia. When the Marquis heard this, he was furious. Leonia, sitting on the veranda with a cup of tea, thought that perhaps he was hearing all this right now. The grandmother asked how she liked her dessert. The girl replied that it was all very tasty, but it would be good if the grandfather joined them. But then suddenly Leonia looked down and saw a lizard running under her feet. Noelle, seeing her, asked, what is that? But when the girl turned back, she saw a peacock. She didn't understand what it all meant. Then Noelle saw the boys and told them to go away now and clean up all those animals. Jan explained that these were their gifts for Leonia. He showed her the peacock and said it was big and strong, just like she wanted. The girl told her uncles that she thought something cute, fluffy, and with 4 paws would suit her much better. When the boys heard this, they said they understood, and now they would definitely bring something she would like. At this point, Leonia thought that if she was going to fight Guidon and the Emperor, she needed to do something about this house of happiness first. When she returned to her room, she thought she had told the Emperor that her magical abilities hadn't fully awakened yet. But she perfected it a long time ago, and it's more than just traveling through time and space. But Leonia thought it would be best to hide the cards for now. She didn't want the Emperor to know what she was capable of. Also, she can't let the Wangler house become insignificant again. Even with her powers, she's still a child, and she needs people who can protect her. The Emperor wants to use Leonia as a political tool. The House of Heidegger and the House of Wangler united, primarily because the Emperor wanted a son to be born to a swordsman and a sorceress, the one at the root of all their misfortunes. And one girl can't beat him. Leonia thought that Oslo always followed Guidon's orders perfectly. If only she could get him on her side. Then a knock on the door suddenly interrupted her musings. It was her uncles. They asked if the girl was in the room. Leonia wondered what they had come up with this time. When her uncles came into the room, there was a little lion cub in John's arms. He said he's still a baby, so he can only drink milk for now. The girl wondered how a lion cub could be a baby, because one of his paws is bigger than a girl's face. Jan said he was born on a ship I was taking across the sea, but the sailors said his mother died in childbirth. When the girl took the lion cub in her arms, she thought that he was also without a mom. But at that moment her grandfather ran into the room and shouted that they were rascals. He asked his sons what they had given his beloved and tender granddaughter. How dare they give her a dangerous and disgusting creature? But Leonia said she thought he was even cute. Then Grandpa laughed and said that they had outdone themselves as usual. Then he said that of course his granddaughter's pet should be a lion. Then he asked the girl if she had already thought of a name for it. Leonia said that if it is a lion cub, it will be called Roshan. Hearing this, Grandpa said that Roshan was even a very good name. But at that moment, the maid came into the room, and she said that Miss Leonia's bedroom was ready. Then the grandfather took his granddaughter's hand and told them to go and see her soon. Leonia at this moment didn't understand why she was so anxious. After all, it was just a bedroom. She was blindfolded and all the maids lined up in a row. She couldn't believe they were giving her an opening ceremony. Grandpa opens the door and says he hopes the girl likes the room. When the door opens, he says she can already take off the blindfold. When Leonia opened her eyes and looked at her room, she noticed that it was all pink. A kid her age would have been thrilled with it, but in her past life she was 32 years old. Wangler told her to look at the ceiling as well. She said she really liked the painting, so they hired Michelangelo to paint the ceiling for her. As the girl looked up at the ceiling, she wondered if they were referring to the very same Michelangelo, this main contractor of the church, the greatest artist of his time. Leonia was shocked. She couldn't believe he had been hired to decorate a little girl's room. Then her grandmother came up to her and told her they would change it immediately if she didn't like it. "I said it's all too much, didn't I?" her grandfather told her. And after that he asked her why she was silent and didn't say anything. Leonia thought that before she had come back, she had been too focused on getting Guidon's approval that she hadn't even thought about visiting her mother's family. But what she was looking for had been here all along, just like chasing a bluebird that kept waiting for home. The girl did not understand why she had not guessed all this before. Then Leonia ran up to her grandparents and hugged them hard. She said she had never received such gifts before and thanked them, saying she was very pleased. At dinner, she turned to her grandfather and said she had something she wanted to tell him. When Tobian heard this, he said she could ask her uncle for anything, and he would bring even her father's head if she asked. Count Wangler said that was a wonderful idea, but the girl replied that she didn't think she needed a head. When Grandpa heard this, he shouted at his sons and asked what Leonia should do with that head. Leonia replied that the truth was that the Imperial Academy she went to had offered to hold an exhibition of her work, but her father refused. And then the girl thought that if her grandfather was her new guardian, maybe it wouldn't be too late if he allowed it. Count Wangler jumped to his feet and said that he would go to the principal's office right away. At this point, Leonia thought that if the exhibition was taken care of, it was time to meet her. Sometime later, the Duchess of Stein came to Leonia and said that they had not seen her for a long time, and that she had heard that the girl was going to have an exhibition. Then she asked if that meant it had started. Leonia said that everything was right, and it was time to show everyone her magical abilities. At this time, the Count and Countess Wangler were watching their conversation, and the man asked what that woman could be talking about with their lovely granddaughter. Noelle told her husband. He saw the way she held herself at the funeral after all, and she's sure Leonia can handle things on her own. But at this time, one of the uncles, along with the lion cub, was sitting in the bushes watching his niece. He didn't understand why the mean lady was talking to their cute little chicken. He told Rochin to go away because the boy didn't understand why the lion kept following him. When Lady Stein heard the noise in the bushes, she said the girl was loved here, and it showed. But Leonia, they weren't just talking, and asked the girl if she wanted to ask her for a favor. Stein said that's right, and explained that the Academy is having her exhibition soon, and she wants the girl to invite that person. With those words, the girl handed her an envelope. And then Leonia asked why she wanted to invite him out of everyone else. Stein answered her. "Why, it's just the man you were looking for, isn't it? There's nothing bad for you. He might even make a good test subject for your ability." Leonia asked, "What's the cure for all this?" Stein said that's why she likes talking to smart people. They know what they're talking about right away. Leonia said that was very good. Then her funeral debt would be paid off. Stein stood up and told the girl to stay in touch. Her doors would always be open for her. When Leonia was alone, she thought if she thought so, the girl was trying to save her along with Oslo. Then the girl thought that if he had been killed, had it been the cunning fox who had betrayed him, or had they both died because of their failure? Leonia told herself that it was okay. Whatever happens, all she needs is to use her to her advantage. The boy who was sitting in the bushes didn't understand why he could feel the aura of an adult emanating from his niece, the chicken, but she pushed those thoughts away from her, and thought that he was the adult here. Those thoughts wouldn't let her get to him. Leonia, seeing her uncle, asked how much longer he was going to hide there. The boy came out and asked her how she knew he was hiding there. Leonia explained that bushes don't move on their own, and of course she noticed. When her uncle sat down next to her, she asked, "Was he worried about her?" Tobias replied that of course he was worried, for it was the woman who was evil. When the girl heard this, she asked, "Does he really think it is fitting for a gentleman to listen to a lady talk?" Pouring tea, Leonia said that if he told anyone what he had heard today, he would never be a real gentleman. Which means she'll only offer him milk because it's a kid's drink. He knows gentlemen don't even put sugar in their coffee. At this point, Tobias took the cup and drank it in a gulp, saying that of course he knew, and he, like a gentleman, liked the taste of coffee, and he thought it was so bitter that he wanted to die. Leonia told her uncle that he was a true gentleman, and so grown up. A few days later, the exhibition finally started. The guests were whispering, saying that they had never seen such a large exhibition before, and it was obvious they'd spent a year's fee on it. And it's true that the Duke adores his granddaughter. When Leonia arrived, she thought there were more people in the hall than she had expected. She wondered if the person Stein had asked for had come. When she looked to the side, she saw her uncle trying to pick up the lion cub, and thought it best not to approach them. Suddenly, people in the crowd began to whisper, "Look here, this man! He hasn't appeared since the incident that brought him here." Then Leonia thought he had come at last. Marquis Karl Jaspers. This is a man of immense influence. The entire economy and politics of the eastern region is under his influence. However, Marquis Jaspers was badly wounded in the Battle of Mount Guli, one of the fiercest battles in the Empire's history. Iran continues to eat away at his flesh. Leonia ran up to him and said that they were just waiting for him and she was honored to meet him. She told him her name. The Marquis thought that an ordinary child could not have such a look. Then he said he thought she was Lord Goyden's daughter. Leonia said that she had prepared a special picture for him and told them to walk together. After that, they came to some kind of attic. Karl was surprised and asked, "Did she really prepare the stairs and the door for him?" The girl said that was what she had written to him about. He only needed to climb the stairs. Karl got angry and asked what kind of bullying she was even daring. But the girl said in a calm voice that she was sure my lord was aware of the magical abilities of House Wangler, and wasn't he curious about her ability? After a brief silence, Leonia said, "They are waiting for him." The Marquis asked what she meant by they. Leonia said that the Wangler's ability couldn't be activated without the participants' consent, and asked if he didn't want to meet them. The Marquis said that if the people she was talking about were really the ones he was thinking of. With these words, he began to climb the stairs, and said he really wanted to see them. He thought of his second daughter, saying that he should visit Duke Heidegger's daughter's exhibit, because it will be an unforgettable experience. To the Marquis, he said to her, "What an exhibition, because he's been through the war." The girl said that if he didn't like it, she promised that she would give up her inheritance rights. He thought that if it was really as this girl said, he would go back 17 years. 17 years ago at the Battle of Mount Guli, 50,000 men stormed the heights of the mountain, but only 2,000 survived. That battle has remained in history as a symbol of tragedy. Marquis Karl was climbing the watchpost to check on enemy movement, when a swell struck the post from above and killed Marquis Karl's comrades. Yes, not the pains Marquis Charles had endured had since been worse than death. Climbing the ladder, he thought he should hurry up and open it faster. When he opened the doors, Ah shouted to his companions to leave as soon as possible. His friends laughed and asked what was wrong with him. Was he having a nightmare? Karl ran up to them, and one of the friends said they had some very good wine here and asked that he drink it, because it relieves the tension. When he looked into the drink, he said the cannon would turn this place into splinters. They should hurry up and get out of here soon. He didn't understand why they were standing. They need to run away so that they don't die. But his friends asked, "What is he talking about? After all, they are already dead." One of his friends told Karl to listen. "It's been 17 years today, and that's why he's in this shape. They all died that day." He didn't understand why they were saying that. After all, they were here now, alive and well, right in front of him. One of the men said he was a fool and asked, "He's been sitting in his mansion all this time, hasn't he? He must live his life to the fullest, not just for himself, but for all of them." He motioned for Karl to raise his head. He walked up to him and asked, "It's been painful since then, hasn't it? But from that moment on, it's going to be okay." His companions apologized for leaving first, his alone. They said they would meet him on the other side, but asked that he not come too early. When Carla was asked, they waited and told him to live a good life. And at that moment he found himself back in that room with the stairs. but suddenly he saw a piece of paper and held it in his hands. He asked the girl how that was possible, but Leonia said she was sure my lord did not need to explain. He asked, did she really bring his comrades to life? But the girl said that she merely showed him what he desired most through her painting. Carl said it was all too real to call these people an illusion, and held the piece of paper on which his comrades were drawn to his chest. Took his hand and told him that what she showed him was an illusion, but she said that when she was painting the picture, she heard the voices of her comrades. They asked her to let them see Carl because they wanted to give him a present. Leonia explained that their feelings for him were real. Carlo thanked her and told her that he wouldn't forget what she had done for him, then kissed her hand. Leonia said, "May the light of the Empire be with you." In the evening, when they had already returned to their palace, Count Wangler said that there was an endless line of people who wanted to meet with Leonia. Yang told her father that after all, the royal throne itself had announced the awakening of her abilities. He said that the Marquis himself had offered to give her the mineral mine, but Leonia had refused. The girl thought at that moment that it was thanks to my lord that she lived in peace, and he had given her much more. Dieter said, "My little bunny granddaughter. Of course everyone is blown away. She has such a good heart. The line to see her is endless. Greeting them all paralyzes them. The whole estate," said the count. At this moment in his manner, Guidona sat thinking that this child had healed the Marquis's wound with her ability. If only he had known of her awakening earlier. With these thoughts, he turned to Donkey and asked that he bring Shireen over right away. When Sharon was brought to Gwydon, she screamed and said that she wanted to see her mom, and they let her go. But her father told her to calm down. The girl broke out of Oslo's arms and said she hated him too, because he doesn't care, not even about the unborn child. When the Duke looked at her angrily, the girl apologized to him. At that moment he thought, has she always been so vile? He said that Heideggers don't make fools of themselves. She can talk normally after all. The girl thought her father was scaring her. He leaned over and asked, "How old is she now, Sharon?" The girl replied that she was 7 years old. Then he said her older sister was 10, and all he asks of her is that she be half as much of a lady as her sister. She then turned to the girl who had brought Sharon and asked, "She was the one who trained Leonia, wasn't she?" The girl said yes. Then the Duke said she must now put her heart and soul into teaching this child. She can at least beat him to death, and I beat him all the same. The main thing is to teach her to behave like an aristocrat.